1983, and there's some dark days ahead for video games, but is there really? My name's Stuart, this is Generation Pixel, and welcome to the Pixel Years. Breaking news in 1993, the UK introduces the £1 coin. Arcade owners across the country rush in a panic to try and retrofit their machines to take this exciting new coin. The newest innovation in home entertainment, the compact disc, hits the UK markets, the most exciting introduction to home entertainment since the VHS tape. The genius behind the ZX Spectrum, Clive Sinclair, is honoured by the monarchy and becomes Sir Clive Sinclair, making him a true 8-bit knight. And in darker news, home video games have faced a crash. Well, if you live in North America that is. In Europe and in Japan, things have never looked brighter. So hello friends and welcome back to the Pixel Years, and here we are in 1983 for another nostalgia fueled trip through video games, movies, music and something else I missed out last week. A friend did remind me, and well, the friend that reminded me was, quite ironically, a friend remembers. Go and check out his channel if you get the chance to, because it's awesome stuff. But there will be a new edition this episode. But we're not here to hear me waffle on about what's coming. You're waiting here to see what is coming. So let's start with one of the video games from 1983 that kept me absolutely hooked, and that was Harrier Attack. And what an absolutely fantastic 16 kilobyte game this was on the ZX Spectrum. Now, we were straight off the back of the Falklands War here in the UK, so a game like Harrier Attack was definitely going to make some impact in 1983. And for the most part it looks like a simple little vertical shooter, and for the most part it is, because all you do is you take off with your jump jet Harrier, you fly across the landscape and try to take out as many enemy targets as you can before landing back on your aircraft carrier and getting ready for round 2. Now, as you can see, it was fairly complicated for a 16-bit game, because not only do we have limited ammo in the form of bombs or rockets, but we also have limited fuel as well, so we had to get across that landscape as quickly as possible. Now, in your way, of course, you have enemy aircraft trying to shoot you down, as well as anti-aircraft guns on the ground. Now, it will take a little bit of time for those anti-aircraft guns to bring down your jump jet Harrier, which is quite handy because, as you can see from all the purple splashes on the screen, well, that's the residue that the flak cannons are producing to try and bring your jump jet Harrier down. You do, of course, as I said, have to take on enemy fighters, and they of course will fire rockets at you, and one rocket will of course hit and be a kill. Now, there is one downside when it comes to Harrier Attack, despite it being one of those wonderful just one more try high score seeking games, and that is one hit, one kill. Now, I did say with the flak it would take more than one shot of flak to bring down your jump jet, but one enemy rocket or just one too many hits with the flak cannons and your plane comes down and it's game over. You have to start from the beginning. There are no extra lives, there's no energy bar as such. You just have to get from your aircraft carrier through your bombing run and back onto your aircraft carrier as soon as possible before you get shot down. Otherwise, you're starting with the legendary nil point. So there we go, that was Harrier Attack on the ZX Spectrum, a fantastic little vertical shooter from 1983, and one that I put so much time into that I bear to think about it.
We interrupt this galactic war with an important announcement. Both battle fleets have agreed ceasefire terms because they wish to play Arctic computer games, which they claim are more exciting than fighting. A spokesman said that they were convinced that Arctic computer games had made a major contribution to galactic safety.
Remember, ask for Arctic computer games by name. Other games just aren't the same.
So next up we have another game from the ZX Spectrum library, and of course it's going to be from the ZX Spectrum library because back in 1983, or for most of the, well, all of the 80s actually, the ZX Spectrum was the machine that I had to play my games at home. And next up is a famous game, another 3D game. If you recall from the last episode, 3D games were a thing, and this one is 3D Deathchase. Now 3D Deathchase, or let's just call it Deathchase from now on because that's what everybody tended to call it anyway, had a very simple gameplay formula. You were on your motorcycle, you're driving through the forest and you're trying to shoot the enemy bikes in front of you. Now you will see of course enemy tanks and enemy helicopters appear on the horizon, and yes, you can shoot them too if you're fast enough, but for the most part what you're trying to do is take out the enemy motorcycles and move on to the next stage. And the next stage, believe it or not, was another early mechanic developed back in the 1980s. It was a day-night cycle. So after completing a day cycle, you move on to a night cycle and repeat the process. And this process just repeats until, well, you die. Now you do get lives when it comes to Deathchase, so it's not quite as brutal as Harrier Attack when it comes to that. But the further you go on, the more levels you progress, the more trees come at you, and they come at you faster too. Now what I truly loved about this game came out in 1983, and it's a game about riding a bike through a forest. Now anyone who can cast their mind back to 1983 might recall a similar scene in a very popular movie of the same year. So it didn't take much imagination at all to put yourself into a role in that movie while playing 3D Deathchase, which without a doubt is one of the most talked about ZX Spectrum games from 1983 and from across its library, and one that should definitely be on your list to play if you haven't played it. Or if you haven't played it in a while, why don't you dust down that cassette, load it up and give it a crack again, because it certainly is a fine example of a 16K game pushing the boundaries of its machine.
The Commodore 64 home computer has an unusually large memory. Remember? It also has all the peripherals you're ever likely to need. Monitors, plotters, printers, disk drives, and a vast range of software. Which means you'll get so much more enjoyment out of your home computer. The Commodore 64. Remember the enormous memory, but don't forget the peripherals and software.
Now the third game that took up a lot of my time back in 1983 was a clone game, and yes, there will be a lot of clone games on this list, especially when I'm talking about the ZX Spectrum, because there weren't many new ideas and everyone was jumping on a bandwagon, whether it be Pac-Man like last week or Joust like this week, because this game is Winged Warlords, and it's Joust. But let me tell you, for a Joust clone, this is one of the best clones of Joust and one of even the best versions of Joust that you could hope to play. Now of course there were plenty of other clones and of course ports of Joust out there, but Winged Warlords was one of the finest. I dare say that outside of the arcade itself, this was the best way to play this game. The animation for a 16K game is absolutely phenomenal, and the mechanics when it comes to the momentum that you build while you're playing the game is also breathtaking. You can't stop on a dime in this game. When you build up enough speed, you keep going until you pull back and brake, which sometimes can be a bit frustrating when it comes to the older games, but with Winged Warlords, the control of your character was truly something to behold. Yes, you had momentum, yes, you had to slow down to stop and turn, but your movement was so silky smooth it was unbelievable at times, gliding through that 116K screen, taking out your enemies. Now your enemy types are quite generic. You have the other Pegasus riders there with you, and of course as in Joust it's your job to knock them off and then dispatch of the rider when they hit the ground, or before if you're quick enough. Another enemy type was the dragon that would come in. Now as far as I'm aware, you can't beat this dragon, you just have to get out of its way. Now if you didn't manage to dispatch the enemy knight when he landed on the ground, eventually he would turn purple. A new mount would come for him and he would be a far more deadly enemy to take on. And like all early games, it was a high score game. It was try to beat your high score, and it really did draw you in because the game mechanics and animations were just spot on. So there we have Winged Warlords for the ZX Spectrum. Definitely a game that you should play if you've never played it, and like before, if you've got the tape sitting there doing nothing, dust it off, load it up and get it played again.
Cadbury Flake, the crumbliest, flakiest milk chocolate in the world.
Now the fourth game is something truly special. It's one of the earliest platformers that you can play, and it is as brutal as Dark Souls, and that is none other than Manic Miner. And let me tell you, back in 1983 there weren't many games that could frustrate you just as much as Manic Miner. Now it wouldn't frustrate you in the way that the game was cheap. It didn't kill you because it was an arcade style game that was trying to kill you without being fair to you. No, when you died in Manic Miner it was all your fault. Manic Miner had one screen of platforming with several items that you had to collect and then get to an end zone. And the trick of the game, well, despite the pixel perfect jumping that you did have to pull off, was having to work out the route that you were going to take to each item and then to the end zone, because there were other pitfalls in there other than just falling to your death, because you could fall to your death quite easily in Manic Miner, but there were also disappearing floors and other obstacles, both moving and stationary, that you had to take into account. And without a doubt, Manic Miner was one of the most celebrated games in the ZX Spectrum, and one that everyone must experience at least once. So get out there, get a way to play it, and play it, because there's many ways. You don't need the original hardware or software to do that either. Manic Miner 1983.
You know, I've never said this before, but the first time I saw you, that night in Three Ferrets, I thought you were the loveliest thing I'd ever seen. Well, we've been through a lot since then, but in all those years, there hasn't been a day gone by when I haven't thought of you and said to myself, Arkwright, you're a lucky man.
Oh, Arkwright.
Oh, hello, love. Didn't see you there.
John Smith's for incurable romantics.
Now next up is another very special game, a very special game from a very special development team, and that is Jetpac. Now what makes Jetpac so special? It is, when you look at it, just a simple arcade shooter, but this was also the first game from Ultimate Play the Game, who you might know now as Rare. A games developer that were going to go on and make so many classic games across so many platforms, across so many decades. But we're not just here to talk about Ultimate Play the Game, or Rare for that matter, we're here to talk about Jetpac. And yes, it's a simple little arcade game. You control your character with the jetpack, and also armed with a laser, who will have to shoot his way through waves of enemies, who depending on the level have different patterns of approach. And you have to collect either parts of your spacecraft to rebuild it, or fuel canisters to fill up your spacecraft, so you can then move on to the next level. And again, like Manic Miner and Winged Warlords, the controls in this game were spot on. The movement was fluid, the animation was fantastic, and there were no cheap deaths. If you died in Jetpac, it was because you made a mistake, not because the game cheated you. And anyone who dares consider themselves a proper gamer definitely needs to play Jetpac at least once in their life. Not just from the fact that Rare or Ultimate Play the Game were important developers, and in my eyes they still are important developers, but the gameplay itself was fantastic for the time. So get yourself a copy of Jetpac, whatever way you can, get it played and see what you think about Rare's first game. Now I did at the beginning admit that I made a glaring omission, and I haven't put arcade cabs into the first episode, the pilot episode, but we live, we learn, and a friend reminds you, and you get it done. So here are some of the arcade cabs that I was playing back in 1983. We had Dragon's Lair, the game that they tried to lie to us that we could get cartoon quality graphics in an arcade cab. Not quite, but a good try anyway. Get yourself into your 007 mood by playing Spy Hunter, a horizontal shooter where you take control of either your spy car or spy boat to shoot every enemy in front of you. Mario and Luigi get their first outing in Mario Brothers, a very simple one-screen platformer that, yes, did get ported to the ZX Spectrum as well. Track and field, where you could wear your fingers away to a stump just rattling on those power buttons and hopefully getting that 45-degree angle for the perfect throw or jump. And the cream of the crop of 1983, Star Wars from Atari, the vector graphics masterpiece that if you were lucky enough you could get the sit down cab and truly feel like you were Red 5 taking on the Death Star. So there you go my friends, that was the Pixel years 1983, and I hope you enjoyed taking that trip through my nostalgia lane and seeing some of the things that kept me entertained back then. Now if you want to talk about any of the games or movies or music or even the news that you've seen today, then drop that down in the comments, because the interaction between you and me, well, that's what makes YouTube special. Thank you very much for watching, and of course as always, until next time, cheerio!